Welcome to the Treasury Whisperers Talkcast podcast, your go-to source for insightful interviews and dynamic panel discussions in the worlds of treasury, banking, payments, fintech, and much more. Here now is your host, the Treasury Whisperer, Seth Marlowe.
Hello, Whisperees. Joining me today in the Whisperer studio is Joseph Noy. Joseph is the founder, CEO, chief connector, and master distiller of the NeuGroup. Joseph founded NeuGroup over 30 years ago to provide insight to treasury and finance leaders to help them succeed. In 2001, he pivoted the company into a membership organization. Today, the NeuGroup network nurtures its 1,000 plus corporate practitioner members with access to always-on peer validation worldwide by providing a wealth of ways to easily connect and exchange expertise, resources, and opportunities. Prior to starting NeuGroup, Joseph held roles at The Economist Group, serving as managing editor of its finance and treasury publication, and as a research analyst on projects involving global treasury, derivatives markets, and overseas business development. He holds an MA in International Banking and Finance from Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs and a BA in International Relations from the University of California at Santa Barbara. Joseph, I am delighted to welcome you to the Treasury Whisperers Talkcast podcast.
Seth, great to be here. You nailed my introduction. That's makes me sound better than I possibly could be. But it's great
too modest.
It's great to be with you. You know, as we were talking earlier, you know, we kind of travel in similar circles and always seem to meet kind of by happenstance.
Right.
So it's great to be on your podcast and hopefully make continued connections more intentional going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the sound of that. So we're going to jump right in. And I think for the folks that are listening and certainly myself, maybe you could give us a bit of the origin story around starting the NeuGroup and why Treasury. I mean, how did this all start?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And my wife always laughs when people, one, ask me what NeuGroup does and two, how it began. And I always like to think about it in kind of a seminal moment. I mean, you mentioned how we pivoted in 2001 to becoming a membership organization, and kind of what led to that is I had an advisory board member who was going from the East Coast out to Silicon Valley to take on a VP finance treasury job at a tech company. And he had asked me, do you know any people in Silicon Valley? And I said, not only know people in Silicon Valley, but I happen to know the predecessor of the at the company of the role you're taking on. And so I put together a lunch out in San Jose, and one of our mutual friends who happened to be the treasurer of Adobe at the time, Barbara Hill, hosted this lunch, and we had my advisory board member James Haddad and his predecessor in for a lunch at the Adobe cafeteria. And we sort of started the lunch talking about what was going on at this company that I probably shouldn't name, but people will be able to figure it out, I think. What projects were going on, and sort of the perspective from James' predecessor, which I think was an interesting connection to make and timely. But then the conversation turned to sort of more general treasury related topics, and at the end of the lunch, we sort of said, this was a great experience. Wouldn't it be great if we could do this more regularly with more treasury professionals? And Barbara shared with me that, she was thinking about putting together a group of treasurers, tech treasurers in Silicon Valley and maybe beyond that. And I had been working on this idea of kind of taking these roundtables that we were doing at the time that were kind of bringing people together around various topics that were timely and interesting. They're thinking back, it was, really at the outset of the internet really being a big thing. And so we would do roundtables around things like, how to use the web for treasury related purposes, which, is thinking to today is, not so dissimilar from the discussions around how to
That's
use
right.
AI. So we sort of hatched this plan. I said, I've been doing these roundtables, which were really successful, and I'd always loved doing them. We used to do them back at the Economist Group under the Economist Intelligence Unit. And the
Mm-hmm.
Economist had a really good network of executives globally, and they would do these executive roundtables. And I always loved the format. And it was around that time that, most of our revenue at the company at the time was built around a subscription newsletter, and the roundtables and other seminars were sort of the ancillary
Mm-hmm.
revenue opportunities. And it dawned on me that we could flip that and make the roundtables really the subscription. This opportunity from this lunch in the Adobe cafeteria to do it for tech treasurers kind of emerged, and we ran with it. So I put on an event in Napa Valley, and we kind of dubbed it the Tech 20. We had, we're the treasurers of the 20 most significant or largest tech companies in the U.S. at the time, and and had I think a two day offsite event that was a series of sessions in a roundtable format, and everyone loved it, and it was a great experience, and it sort of validated my idea that doing these roundtables could be the core of the business going forward. So we kind of used the success of that event to kind of pivot to uh, to a membership organization using this roundtable format, which we kind of dubbed peer groups, which kind of brings people together, true peers that have the same job role, either from companies that are in the same sector or the same size, that you bring them together to have an open, frank discussion in a safe space where they can share and learn from each other to gain insights and really advance outcomes by getting help from their peers, validation, and doing it in a way that's also fun and memorable. So
Mm-hmm.
it builds lasting connections. That formula, I mean, I'll never forget. I think the opening dinner we did for that event was on Halloween, and we gave everybody funny masks to wear, and it just it got everybody comfortable and off guard.
Sure.
Got their guard down, and it set up a great tone. And I've always felt that if you can bring people together, create a safe space where they feel like they can share openly, and then also make it fun and memorable, it's a recipe for success.
Absolutely. I'm curious to the extent to which the members of the different roundtables have taken an ownership in it, where they want to help to direct what the conversations are about and do their fair share of networking and calling a friend for help within that circle as just part of the way they go forward after they've been introduced to it all.
No, Seth, you really put your finger on a key part of this, and there's a number of dynamics that are kind of important to unpack. I mean, first and foremost, obviously we work pretty closely with the members to figure out what they want to talk about in the meetings that we conduct, and kind of the foundation of that is getting them to share what projects they're working on and kind of what their priorities are in line with their overall goals for themselves, for the teams, for the company. And with that information, that gives us a lot of data to work with to not only set the agenda for the meetings, but to connect them and encourage them to connect themselves with other members in their groups and then across the broader network that are maybe working on something similar that they can collaborate on, or maybe have done that already and they could kind of get a download of what to do to be successful or what not to do, which could be equally as important.
Exactly.
But what we found is that people always have the best intentions of picking up the phone or meeting with their colleagues, but they get back to the office after one of our sessions, and the day-to-day just sort of overwhelms them. And so while we continue to encourage and try to make it figure out what is the recipe to, maybe not force is the right word, but really have people connect in between the meetings, either in one-on-one sessions or in smaller groups. But we really have found that it requires some effort on our part to do that. So we have kind of this service we've dubbed Connected by NeuGroup, where we serve as a concierge or facilitator to do it. And we tried to be subtle at first, so not to force it on people. But the feedback we've gotten is, no, please force it on us, because it's so valuable. And if we don't take advantage of it, it's really on us. So a lot of the feedback that we've gotten is that be proactive in helping us connect with each other. And that's a big part of what makes NeuGroup tick. And we're trying to always figure out, what is the best way to get people to do that on their own proactively. And you could say, like, what if they did that, would they still need NeuGroup? But people have, as I mentioned before, their day-to-day jobs, and as Treasury becomes doing more and more with the same or less, like in leaner staffs, that they don't have a lot of bandwidth to connect with each other. And so having a third party facilitator that they trust to do that for them is just of huge value. And so I believe there'll always be a place for us or someone like us to perform that service. But there's so much value that they can get by being proactive and doing that on their own. We want to encourage that as well.
Yep. No, I think it's a fantastic thing that you do for the industry. And I can certainly relate. I go back to my GE days. We would frequently have we called it a peer company review, so to speak. It wasn't always a peer company. I do remember once comparing notes with the United States Postal Service, which ran quite an interesting treasury organization. But, there were any number of those that we would do during the course of the year, where literally a group of us out of the GE Treasury group, along with a group from the other organization, would get together either in person or over the phone back in those days, and kind of go through, like you said, the projects on tap for the year, the experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly, share some stories, where we could potentially help each other with certain things. And it was so embedded into our culture that literally it was in any of our senior leaders in Treasury's performance reviews for the year. You had to be participating in these.
No, that is like a great anecdote, because not enough companies place real value and tie it into incentives. In fact, there's some companies that tend to think they know everything already and don't reach out to benchmark with other companies. And one of my favorite anecdotes, again, probably shouldn't share the company name, but it was a company that thought that they were, far and away the world leader in foreign exchange management from a corporate treasury perspective. And after coming to a few of our sessions in our dedicated foreign exchange manager group, they sort of changed their tune a little bit by saying, they've learned so much by working with other companies. That doesn't necessarily diminish their standing as foreign exchange managers, but that they even a corporate that thinks they are the best at something still have things that they can learn, and wanting to get better is something that I think we should all strive for. And, we were talking before the show about, the GE experience that you had, and, that we've seen through many of our members and alumni. And, what a great incubator and exporter of talent. And that's a company that, just former GE people have been a key component of our membership, directly and indirectly over the 30 plus years that we've been doing this. Another company that, has been in that category is General Motors. They also were a great exporter of talent. And there's numerous other companies in different areas where we've seen that. Having those companies as member companies and part of our network, it's been really tremendous to see. And, then we benefit both from their alumni get-togethers and networks that they have, but then as they proliferate into other companies, they bring them onto the platform. So we love companies that are that are great exporters of talent.
Yeah. And it was a great place to be because everybody around you was so smart. You had no choice but to lift up your game.
Yeah, no, I can believe it. It's and there's numerous GE case studies I think that are out there being taught in various business schools, but just like exploring how they became such a incubator and exporter of talent is one that probably could generate a lot of case studies to examine.
For sure. So I'm going to pivot a little bit from there. I guess let's talk about this past year. Let's talk about 2025. You certainly and the NeuGroup have been busy. I was reading 60 in-person events, 253 virtual sessions, and I guess the question is: do you or your team, do you sleep?
Well, I mean, fortunately, I built up over the years a really great team that enable enable us as a company to do all this. And then you mentioned the ownership of the members. Of course, a lot of thanks goes to them for not only showing up but engaging and guiding the topics that try to make the investment in time really worthwhile for them to participate. Because at the end of the day, whatever membership fees we charge, hopefully nominal in terms of the value we bring, but the time investment is really what becomes critical. And so, you have to have all these kind of events, both in person, virtually. You really have to deliver value with them. And fortunately, and this year was no exception. There's been plenty to talk about. I always say that firms like NeuGroup tend to thrive when there's a lot of uncertainty. When there's crisis periods, we do reasonably well. Also, and I hate to root for crises, but certainly uncertainty when you don't really know what you should be doing. That's when it's the most valuable to get in the room with other people that are wondering the same, that are in a similar job role to you. So, I was, quite a roller coaster year with the introduction of tariffs at the beginning of the new Trump administration, a lot of geopolitical issues, a lot of change happening on in terms of how you source capital. We've been doing a lot of work with providers of private credit and helping even investment grade companies better understand how to tap new sources of capital from private credit providers. And I think there's a there that's going to multiply even further over time in terms of more ways to raise capital than the traditional ones. And then you layer on top of that, all the discussion around AI and technology that's happening in and of itself has been provided a huge need to raise capital, particularly for the hyperscalers and all the people in that ecosystem around data centers. The I've kind of come up with this term that the future is very capital intensive, and fortunately, there's plenty of capital to support that. But it also trickles down to the simple things like cash management and working capital become even more important in an environment where capex is huge, and the need to raise capital is so huge that nurturing your internal sources of capital also becomes that much more important. And so if you look across, all these things, there's a lot of it comes into the realm of treasurers and treasury management, and
Sure.
it's given us so much to talk about, and a lot of that carries over into 2026, which we're really looking forward to do as well. But if we're in an environment where there's a lot of change happening, and certainly that's the case here with uncertainty and a lot of need for capital and focus on cash and working capital, brings treasurers and their teams front and center to the to the decision making process, and also that they have a really good understanding of the issues, the options, the opportunities, and there's just no better way to do that then, again, getting in the room with really smart peers and talking about it.
Absolutely. Is there another element that's gone on in 25 and I think is only going to continue 26 and beyond? The need for speed, I'll call it.
Yeah.
It seems that everything is just coming at everyone fast and furious with an expectation of you should be able to solve problems faster. You should be able to close transactions faster. How much is that affecting the office of the treasurer?
It's a really good question because, there's been, a lot of discussion around real-time treasury in the
Hmm.
context of real-time payments, interfaces to banks and the rest. And I think there initially was some, I don't know if resistance is the right word, but some discussion around what is really the value add of real-time from a treasury perspective. Um, and I think that thought process has kind of changed now that we really realize and that not only not only is the world going faster, but the technology and the compute level is going enabling us to go faster. And then you layer on AI doing more and more tasks and work. AI operates at compute speeds and that are far beyond what humans are capable of. And I think like people like Elon Musk have talked about this, that part of part of the logic behind Neuralink, for example, is having a faster interface to to computers and being able to keep up with AI agents as they're doing work at higher and higher speeds. And recently I was I was asked to consider the implications for quantum computing on Treasury, which seems very advanced, but it was in the context of this roundtable I was asked to facilitate in Abu Dhabi for Abu Dhabi Finance Week. As we were talking about before the show, the whole modus operandi for UAE and their Falcon economy initiative to diversify away from oil and gas is really kind of bring the future forward and bring a modern uh, economy to the UAE. And as part of that, they're really emphasizing AI, everything blockchain, and quantum computing layered on top of that. And so in preparing for this roundtable, I was like sort of thinking through what are the ramifications and really not having any use cases at the ready. But in the last 2 months, even in our groups, we've had at least two companies talking about using quantum computing to help do things faster in the exposure management realm, as an example,
Hmm.
to get a read on the impact of rate changes and things like that relative to their exposures, and kind of creating a digital twin model to help model that and to do it at a really faster rate. And while the quantum computer is not quite there yet, the efforts to get there, make compute faster, are really turning up the timeframes on this. We used to, I mean, there's a member company that's really advanced in risk management from a treasury perspective. They used to talk about how they would pump in their risk models into Monte Carlo simulator and run that overnight. And these days the compute has gone so much faster that that's probably a second, maybe not 2 seconds, but a minutes and seconds exercise, and it probably will get to be a seconds exercise. And the idea of waiting to make decisions is probably not something that Treasury people are going to have the luxury of doing for
Hmm.
too much longer as these technologies come into play. And so I think they need to be on offense, embracing how to think faster and using all these tools to think faster, even though there needs to be a judgment layer and maybe some retrospection. And getting that balance right is going to be a tricky journey. But getting back to this idea of everything going faster, I just think it's inevitable. And so being prepared to work on a 24/7 basis, which is,
Hmm. 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 Hmm.
one of the appealing things about the crypto world, and all the talk around stable coins is you can move money 24/7, and it's not quite instantaneous but pretty close. This idea of float and batch processing and all these kind of traditional historical um, corporate finance ways of thinking, I think are eroding very, very.
Yeah, it's lot to be changed as these become the accepted ways of doing business. Personally, from my standpoint, I think we're, instead of seeing the 4-day work week, I think we're going to see an expansion. I think there will be a 7-day work week. Not that individuals will work 7 days, but there will be 7 days to be worked. And because at the end of the day, there will be transactions that will take place on Saturday, on Sunday. It's happening now with
Yeah,
certain
yeah,
real-time payments, but there's all the other processes within an organization that need to adapt to the fact that these things are happening. Money's moving, so therefore process needs to happen. It can't just be limited to business days.
yeah. No, and it's really interesting. I mean, the other thing that I find fascinating, Seth, is just the speed with which companies are growing and scaling globally.
Mm.
Every cycle gets faster and faster. But we've had some insight into tech companies and AI specific tech companies, and just the speed with the which they're growing, and it's global instantaneously, and they're reaching 500, 800 trillion market caps within a very short time frame. And then you think about, scaling, and you have the GE experience. We talked about, the scale of GE's treasury across GE Industrial and GE Capital, and think about like these companies, the growth that they're having, and having to think about, scaling their SG&A and treasury functions to support that global growth is really mind blowing, and unprecedented. People probably said that through previous cycles as well. I think real time is maybe not fast enough. We had there was a guy that we had at our roundtable that kind of specialized in high speed infrastructure for financial exchanges and setting up the technology around that. And we're talking less than seconds, milliseconds, and whatever the smaller than a millisecond that the transactions are getting processed. And so, systems are prepared for that. And then we have to figure out what is the human interface for this, because the speed with which transactions can get processed, and exposures analyzed, and how AI tools can act upon them is much faster than that we can even comprehend as humans, and that sets up all sorts of interesting governance, risk, and compliance issues that I don't know that we've fully worked out to the extent that we need to yet.
For sure. And I think with, back to quantum, I think that's going to create some security and cyber threats,
Yeah,
probably far faster than any of us believe. I've heard that there are already some government target dates of 2030 and 2035 being identified for readiness for adopting new security keys for everything that makes up everything from a web browser to be secure, to passwords, to any of the payment rails. So there's a lot of work ahead to make sure that we can continue to have a secure and continuous flow of funds despite the technology.
yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, I've heard it characterized as kind of a race between the cyber hackers and the security people, to make sure that they're at least getting to the finish line at the same time, if not ahead, if not the good guys side being ahead of the black hat side of it. So it's gonna be very interesting. But I mean, a lot of these things that seem sort of far fetched and science fiction are kind of upon us. Maybe not for 2026 exactly, but the preparation timeline for them probably needs to start now, even if they're not upon us next year.
Exactly. So I've already heard the term that's been created, Y2Q, which I guess is year 2000 quantum, whatever that year might happen to be.
I haven't heard that, but I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, hopefully it's like a equally much of a non-event as Y2K.
Hoping. It's got the sound of an added series of components because of just the fears of the bad guys looking to get their hands on this technology as much as everybody else wants to. So it is very much a race. Let's talk about 2026. What does 2026 look like? And I kind of call out two parts to the question. One is from a Treasury perspective, and two is from a NeuGroup perspective. Are there new things, new roundtable groups, new locations, new things that you're planning on rolling out in the coming year?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take the NeuGroup part first, I think, because it kind of plays into the other piece. I think we have a couple, at least a couple, but I'll focus on two initiatives for 2026. One is to get more non-U.S. companies onto the platform. I mentioned earlier that we're expanding into the Middle East, particularly in the Gulf region. We started an initiative to bring more European headquartered corporates onto the platform last year, which we're continuing. Because this idea of treasury and finance being ever more global and sharing best practices and knowledge across the world, I think is important. And I think that also helps kind of bring people together and help settle some of the geopolitical issues that also we saw flare up, not only this year, but leading into it. The other big initiative from a NeuGroup perspective is looking at new ways that we can help with value creation through our platform. We started working with a private equity firm, and through that experience, I've really kind of seen how they operate, particularly by utilizing their operating partners and subject matter experts to help execute against a value creation plan and enhance the enterprise value of their portfolio companies. And we've seen in working with them how a NeuGroup type model can help with that by, facilitating knowledge sharing and bringing best practices and insight into action for their portfolio companies through peer groups and creating different peer groups for different executive categories for their portfolio companies. And I think there's some great opportunities there for us to sort of take that idea that exists within the private equity world of value creation on a much more targeted operating scale, preparing them for exit, kind of because of the time frame involved, sort of focuses the mind on value creation and the time horizon for it. So they do it, some of them do it really, really well. And I think there's a lesson for us in sort of taking that model across our whole network, including the public companies or companies of any size, to really work with them using our peer group model to help them with value creation. And then it sort of goes to all the things we talked about before that NeuGroup does, but with a bit more intent on advancing measurable outcomes. And, I think we see this across the software side of recurring revenue companies or SaaS companies. Mm-hmm. Because of AI, that, the old user licensing model doesn't always work as well because, AI agents using the software as well. And so, they're looking for new models. And, one of them is outcomes based. I don't know that we're going to necessarily move to an outcomes-based pricing model, but I really love this idea of creating value outcomes for our members through the model. And it ties back to the work that we're doing in private equity. And I think that is going to be a huge initiative that, we'll get started with in earnest in 2026, that we're going to do more experimenting around that, both expanding what we're doing in the PE world, but then also bringing that to the broader model. And I think that's plays into, the other question of, for as long as I've been doing this, that we've talked about, there's been talk about the Treasury being a strategic player and a value add to companies. And, there's been some great strides in that. But at the end of the day, it's very hard for Treasury to break out from getting the resources and technology and talent that they need to really cope with this future world that's rapidly coming, unless they can really show outcomes that are value based. And there's some great examples of treasurers that have done this over time, where they use wins. They in like as part of kind of the business partner role, I like to call it, for Treasury, where they work with the businesses to really enable revenue growth, profit growth, free cash flow growth, and they take those wins and use them as a business case to get resources back into Treasury. I know you had an earlier episode with my friend Ed Barry from Treasury 4,
Yes.
and he talked a little bit about his experience in working with George Zinn at Microsoft, and they've recently merged their two companies, which is fantastic. George Zinn was like really, really good at this, both emphasizing the business partner role, but also taking the value creation element of Treasury and using that to build a tremendous Treasury organization. And so I think, like, to really make Treasury as a true strategic partner and a value creator, there's got to be even more of a focus on these business wins, or these outcomes, and have
Yes.
Treasury be seen as an enabler of revenue, an enabler of profit, and it really comes back to free cash flow generation, because I talked about how the future is capital intensive, and we need to raise capital any way we can, but also harness the internal sources of capital. So anything where Treasury can show that they've boosted free cash flow and internal capital for the businesses to grow is just huge. And so that's a message that we've got to continue to amplify, and 2026 is going to be a big year for that. Just think we're gonna probably come to a turning point. Is all this AI spend a bubble, or is it for real, and other things? So 2026, I think, is going to be a big inflection point for this idea, and getting treasurers to think about how they can be enablers and empower their companies to make this kind of transition that we're in to this kind of future AI operating model system is going to be more important ever. So I think 2026, kind of those are, if I could put it all in a one word, is so Treasury as value creator is like more important than ever. And I've always believed that, and it's been a big part of the mantra here at NeuGroup since we've begun. But I think it's just more important than ever, and I would just love to evangelize like more and more people to get behind that. And I hope you, Seth, could be one of those, because you'd be very influential.
I'm bought into that. It's something I've seen in organizations I've worked for, dating back to, I'll even go back pre 2000, my days at Pepsi. We had cash management consultants, and one of the things they were evaluated on was value creation. And they had to convince divisional CFOs of initiatives around working capital and free cash flow, even back then. And it was a big deal, but there wasn't the talent at the divisional level, or the resources. It's not that the talent wasn't there. The resources weren't there, but as Treasury would go in and do a review, it wasn't just do the review and say, well, we did a review. It was, okay, I've now gotten a CFO to buy in on it, and here's what they're doing. And here's, either money saved or cash flow that's been, move forward as a result of that. I think that's the way to go, especially in roles that you have a very hard time quantifying the value that they're bringing.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And you bring up, two other things that, sort of come to mind with what you said. I mean, one is, the importance of putting it in the incentives, like at a personal level where it counts. And people ask me this all the time, like, what have you seen change over 30 plus years of been doing this? And there's some perennial things that just remain true. And you've mentioned one of them of how value creation and treasury kind of go together. But, the big issues don't necessarily change, but the context and, the ability to deal with them with technology and all we've learned has changed. And, to me, that's what makes this area really continuing to be exciting, and you learn something new even 3 decades in. So, I'm sure you feel the same way given your history.
Absolutely. And I having spent a little bit of time talking with and working with a couple of PE firms, VC firms, really,
Uh-huh.
the opportunities there are endless to treat the portfolio companies almost as if they were subsidiaries and allow them to learn from one another.
Yeah.
Huge opportunity there. And more companies are falling in to either a PE or VC structure today, and fewer companies being publicly traded. So I think it's a huge opportunity out there.
No, totally agree. And my eyes have been open to how PE firms operate, as I've said. But I mean, a similar thing could be done in, what would probably derogatorily called conglomerates. But I mean, GE was sort of one of them and had a capital source and talent that they brought to the operating companies. And, they also had a tremendously valuable exit not too long ago where, all the spin outs from the old GE have all done phenomenally well. So it's very, very interesting how that, could apply to, conglomerate model where you see in other parts of the world, where in Japan and Korea and other places where, they have big interconnected subsidiary structures across various sectors. When I was at Columbia, I did kind of a research paper on this, looking at the German house bank model and then the Asian versions of it in Japan and Korea. And that the idea of having sort of an in-house bank, if you will, to, not only provide, capital and liquidity to the family of companies, but I think increasingly expertise and know-how is an interesting model. And there were certainly elements of that within GE that part of your experience that I think shouldn't be discarded just because GE Capital has got too big for what it was trying to do. And the regulatory system sort of like tried to catch up to it, and it sort of didn't work out as stellarly as we may all hope. I think there's a lot to learn from that model, and I've always been a big fan and proponent of in-house banks, like in a general sense, and I think you can take that concept and really put it to work in an interesting way. And so that's another element of Treasury that I think is really fascinating.
Completely agree. And that could be the subject of many podcasts just in and around that.
Yeah. Well, and as I said, there's no end of interesting things to talk about, which make this such a great area to be.
So absolutely true. Joseph, this has been a terrific conversation. I look forward to doing more of these, and for you and me to hopefully have less random meetings over time.
Totally agree. And, keep up the good work with you created a great brand with the Treasury Whisperer and with the eyeglasses too. So
thank you.
Kudos to you. And the bobblehead dolls. It's all great branding.
Thank you. A long way to go. Working on monetizing all of this. I need to pick your brain on that too.
All right. Well, let's talk soon. But the real pleasure, right. And come good into 2026 and Happy New Year.
All right. Thank you. Same to you. Thank you for joining me here in the Whisperer studio. That's a wrap today, Whisperees. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, like, comment on the episode, wherever it is that you get your podcasts. Until next time on the Treasury Whisperers Talkcast podcast, this is Seth Marlowe saying bye-bye for now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Treasury Whisperers Talkcast podcast with Seth Marlowe. The Treasury Whisperers Talkcast podcast is produced by the Treasury Whisperer Studio and Treasury Whisperer LLC. Copyright 2025. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this podcast without the express written consent of Treasury Whisperer LLC is strictly prohibited.